Hello, everyone. You are welcome to the JMA Connections. This Monday, the 25th day of the month of May 2026. Today in the United States, this is Memorial Day. And on this Memorial Day in the United States, of course, is a day where everyone in the country, people come together and, have a pious thought for the men and women in uniform who died on the front serving the interests of this country, protecting the national interests of the United States of America. And so this day is a holiday and it is set aside for that purpose. So it's a day of remembrance, it's a day of, piety in the United States of America. Of course, I know the people of the southern Cameroons, the people of Ambazonia, there are a lot of thoughts in mind that once we send La Republic of Cameroon away from our territory, we definitely are going to institute a day. It may not necessarily be called Memorial Day, but it will be a day which will be on the same model to honor the heroes who today are falling, at the front, defending our homeland, fighting to protect homeland and fighting to ensure that someday soon we will have a place that we can call our own homeland, a place where we shall sit at and excel, a country where we shall sit within and enjoy full sovereignty over our natural resources, and of course be able to determine our own development priorities without waiting for people in some distant land in a very centralized system to be deciding whether we'll be having water or electricity when they don't know our exact realities on the ground, to be deciding whether we'll have hospitals or schools, to be deciding whether it is roads that we need or a reliable energy grid enabling us to power our industries. They know nothing about our land. They know nothing about our realities. They know nothing about the potential that we have as individuals. And they know nothing about the ambitions that we have to grow, to blossom. When you take a look at the Southern Cameroons today, you notice that the self-reliant initiative or initiatives that were a hallmark of the Southern Cameroons, a lot of those things are dying because even to do the least thing in our own homeland, we have to be obtaining authorization from colonial administrations all over the place, and sometimes they can even stop you from carrying out a project that will benefit the people, whereas this is the core of what you call local governance. This is the core of Anglo-Saxonism, where people at the base determine their own development priorities. So yeah, this kind of day is a day that we definitely will think about in the Southern Cameroons. So that said, I want to extend hearty regards to a particular category of people. Those are those Southern Cameroonians, those Ambazonians who had decided that they were turning their backs against this liberation movement, but who, on basis of the evidence they are seeing on the ground right now, that this is the hard way and the only way, that this is the only way we ever restore the dignity of our land. This is the only way we ever secure for ourselves a place we can truly call homeland. This is the only way we ever cause our people to be respected again. This is the only way we ever transform the dreams that we have into effective development, making our land, a place of land, a place of milk and honey, an El Dorado, making our land a destination no one will hear about and not want to visit. That this is the only way we will do it. I want to take today to express hearty regards to them and to them alone, because there are many in numbers. Just this morning, I received calls, from about 7 individuals, 3 of them from Ground Zero, and 4 from the diaspora, who called to ask me, Mr. AKUROH, please direct us how we can resume contributing to this liberation movement. Direct us how we can result being useful in this liberation movement. How we can, how we can resume doing all of those things that we did before to make the movement as powerful as it was, because they are coming to that realization. And some say we'll listen to you on a daily basis, and we realize that in effect, this thing truly was not really meant to be a walk through the park, that we had to gain it through serious toil and through serious resiliency, serious, perseverance, of course, and we have to remain determined and focused. So I'm extending regards to that category of people. That said, I'd like us to look at some very interesting thing today. I've been talking to people in the southern Cameroons a lot. On a daily basis, people call me in places. And I have people who called me from some areas in Donga and Manto and said they were calling, some were calling from Misaje, some were calling from Ako, some said they were calling even from Benju. Benju is actually in Camp, a local government area. And others called that they were calling from Mba. Mba is in Ndu, is in Ndu. I had other people calling me from Mwa. I've been talking to people. I talk to people all over the place. I just mentioned the case of Donga Manto. People calling from Manu, from all over the place, from Bemenda, from Boya, from Kumba, from Boleba Kundu, from all of those areas, from Dipsi Aku, from Ebamut, and even from Nya. This is amazing. But one thing that I hear from these people all the time is they don't have regular power supply. A good lot of the time, people call and say, "Oh, I was unable to listen to your show yesterday. I was unable to listen to your podcast for the past 1 or 2 weeks because we do not have energy. Light only came today after 1 month. In this place, it only came after 2 weeks. In some areas, for 3 months running, we don't have energy, and so I just had to start struggling to go charge power banks in a nearby community in order to come back and settle down and listen to this show. This is painful. It's aching. And so I decided to get into some deep research regarding the hydroelectric potential of the southern Cameroons, and to let our people know exactly why we lose, what we lose, hooking ourselves up to a failed state, a very failed state like La République du Cameroun. The people of La République du Cameroun have decided that they don't need development, that all they need is the opportunity to be worshipping demigods, like the one Ashonyente described as living there in a 2D. Or mumies. That is what they want to devote their whole lives doing. Worshipping Ngaputs who are even struggling to transform their country into a monarchy. Until now they spend their time saying which of the sons, whether Frank Biya or Georges Gilbert Baonla is legitimate and which one is not, to take over the rulership of the country. And they're not saying that they're taking to change, because if you read that stratégie de conservation du pouvoir, de génération en génération, tel père, tel fils, they tell you it is the same system that will be maintained. Because whoever is coming will be operating on that same blueprint if they actually are coming out of this current system. So the current system in Cameroon that has pillaged the resources of the country, impoverished the country for over half a century, is going to be replicated. And so it's going to be another 50 years of the same, maybe even worse. Because when you look at the person who is supposedly better placed to take over from Paul Biya, Frank Emmanuel Biya, and you look at his track record, you look at the level of his embezzlement. They want to talk about Campos, Frank Emmanuel Biya is there with hundreds of millions embezzled. They want to talk about the forestry sector. Frank Emmanuel Biya has literally, depleted some forest reserves all together for himself to make money for himself. You want to talk about this or that way, everywhere is him. And it's the same kind of method. So what do you expect? This is why I'm convinced a lot of our people who backtrack from this liberation movement, and those who were never part of it from day one, calling us all kinds of names, are coming back into the liberation movement, are coming back to the fold now in droves. And I want to thank them for that. So let's delve into the substance of the conversation today, which is about the energy potential of the southern Cameroons. You are going to hear things that will make you remove your intestines and eat. You hear things that will make you wonder how on earth we found ourselves with these people in the first place. So I'm looking at this and I'm saying we are, there's darkness over the people of the southern Cameroons because of this energy blackouts and, the untapped power that lies beneath our land. So today, we ask a question that millions of people in the southern Cameroons are increasingly beginning to ask openly and without fear. Why does a territory blessed with enormous hydroelectric potential continue to live in darkness? Let me hurry quickly before I even get into the specificities of the southern Cameroons to tell you that the Republic of Cameroon, that's that country, La République du Cameroun, when they calculate their energy potential, if you add what it is in the southern Cameroons, they tell you that they are second only to the Democratic Republic of Congo on the continent, with a potential of 120,000 megawatts. Did you hear that? 120,000 megawatts. If Cameroon could only produce 3,500 or 4,000 megawatts, I mean, if Cameroon could only produce, let's just say 4,000 megawatts, like at the moment we speak, they will have so much energy that they can't even use, or they will even be able to export some just from that. And if you calculate 4 megawatts of a total potential of at least 120,000 megawatts, it's not up to 3%. So what the Republic of Cameroon is producing today is not up to 3% of its potential. Because I checked, and last I checked, Cameroon is producing today a maximum of 1,600 megawatts of energy. Can you imagine that? A maximum of 1,600 megawatts. That's why you see what you are seeing. And so that's why the people of the southern Cameroons are beginning to ask this question. Why does a territory blessed with enormous hydroelectric potential, like the southern Cameroons itself, continue to live in darkness? Why are cities like Bamenda, Boya, Kumba, Tiko, Limbe, and countless rural communities trapped in endless blackouts, while the rivers capable of powering entire regions flow endlessly through the land? And perhaps the most explosive question of all, is the energy crisis in the southern Cameroons merely incompetence, or is it a deliberate structure of political and economic subjugation? I ask this, and we are all asking this because by the time we got into this unfortunate journey in 1961, there was a Yoke power plant. There were energy infrastructure in the southern Cameroons that, if they were still alive today, would be contributing to limiting the damage that we are facing today. But they were all dismantled by La République du Cameroun. That is why this question comes. That is the energy crisis in the southern Cameroons merely incompetence, or is it a deliberate structure of political and economic subjugation? Because what we are witnessing today is not an isolated inconvenience. It is becoming a pattern. From Mutengene to Mai 16 Boya, from Tiko to Bole Bakundu, ordinary people have repeatedly poured into the streets to protest months-long outages, collapsed businesses, destroyed livelihoods, and unbearable living conditions. Right now in Bamenda, neighborhoods such as Upstation and behind Avenue in Mendankwe have reportedly remained without electricity for weeks, right in the heart of Bamenda. There are whole communities and villages that have been in darkness for several months, and families are suffering. Businesses are collapsing. Hospitals struggle. Students are reading in darkness. Yet, beneath this same territory lies one of the greatest untapped hydroelectric reserves in Central and West Africa. And that contradiction is where today's conversation absolutely begins. So let's look at this. A territory swimming in energy potential, yet suffering from outages. One of the greatest misconceptions about the Southern Cameroon's question is the belief that the territory's importance lies only in crude oil and plantations. That is why, very quickly, the Republic of Cameroon believes that they can instrumentalize the people of the southern zone, what they call Southwest, to believe that if they go into independence, the people of the Northwest, which is an arid land, which has nothing, as they call Northwest, are going to depend on their oil and the plantations. But that's absolutely where they get it all wrong. Because as I've pointed out before, they believe the only way they hold us down is to divide and rule. So yes, the southern zone, what the Republic of Cameroon calls Southwest region, possesses significant offshore oil reserves around Cape Limbo, alongside vast agricultural wealth built around cocoa, palm oil, tea, rubber, coffee, and banana production. But beneath the politics and conflict lies another strategic resource that may ultimately prove even more transformative than oil itself, and that is water. More specifically, hydroelectric power. The rivers, waterfalls, mountain runoff systems, and river basins that stretch across the northern zones and some parts of the southern zone place the southern Cameroons among the most naturally endowed hydroelectric zones in Central and West Africa. According to available feasibility studies and regional energy assessments, the major hydroelectric sites identified in the southern Cameroons have a combined potential of approximately 1,000 megawatts of electricity generation. That is not a symbolic amount of power. That is transformational energy capacity capable of restructuring an entire economy. The most ambitious of these projects is a hydroelectric project located in Menchum County of the Northern Zone, near the Nigerian border. Feasibility studies conducted by international developers projected the PEP site to generate between 450 to 485 megawatts of electricity from the Katsina-Ala River. You hear? From the Katsina-Ala River system alone. Now, let me hold here. 450 to 485 megawatts of energy from this site alone is more than enough to take care of all of the energy needs of the entire southern Cameroons, and you will never have an electric outage even for 1 second. I've been to countries like Rwanda, like Uganda, like Tanzania and others that do not have the kind of energy potential that Cameroon has. Those countries don't have regular power outages. You go to Kampala, you can be in Kampala for 3 months, you never know whether power goes off. You go to Kigali, you can be in Kigali for months, you don't know whether power goes off. You go to Zanzibar in Tanzania, you can be there for a whole year, you never know whether power goes off. And it cuts across. Go even to Ghana, a lot of these countries don't have this potential. Yet, they are not experiencing the vexing situation that the people of the southern Cameroons are experiencing. So to understand the magnitude of the figure I just pronounced, at 450 to 485 megawatts on the Katsina-Ala River system alone, you should note that a single project in Menchum could dramatically expand the region's electricity output while simultaneously supplying surplus power into eastern Nigeria. Then comes the Manfe hydroelectric project in Manu County in the southern zone. This project, designed around the high volume water flowing through the Cross River Basin, carries another projected generating capacity of approximately 450 megawatts. I say approximately 450 megawatts. Again, we're just from 450 to 485 megawatts. Now we are talking again of 450 megawatts. So combined, the PEP, combined with the PEP in Menchum, these two projects alone could place the southern Cameroons among major regional electricity producers. Beyond these giant projects lies the Menchum Falls hydroelectric project near Wum, which modern engineering studies, I'm talking about engineering studies here, I'm not doing speculation, which modern engineering studies estimate could generate between 72 and 92 megawatts through a more environmentally friendly, sustainable runoff river design. Although earlier reservoir based, now you're looking at reservoir based. If you're not going through the environmentally friendly approach, we will give between 72 and 90 megawatts. You go through the reservoir-based blueprints. The projected capacity will move up to 450 megawatts across the wider Menchum Basin. So you see that just at the level of the Menchum alone, you already have 450 to 485 and another 450, which means only there alone you are getting towards 1,000. Added to what I just talked about in Manu, you are at about 1,300 and something megawatts of energy. So in addition to these flagship projects, the mountainous geography surrounding Mount Fako and the upper Munanya and the Baku River networks possesses dozens of smaller hydro catchments capable of producing between 1 and 20 megawatts each, with a cumulative regional potential exceeding 100 megawatts again. So this added all can get us to well over 1,500 megawatts of energy. But like I said earlier, 450 is just so much already for us, and you export the surplus to Nigeria, and you have a lot of foreign currency reserves coming in as a result of that. Why are we suffering? So what does all this mean in practical terms? It means the southern Cameroon possesses the natural capacity not merely to electrify itself, but to become a major regional energy hub. Cameroon's total, like we do Cameroon right now, Cameroon's total installed national electricity capacity currently hovers around 1,500 to 1,600 megawatts. An insult. This means the hydroelectric potential of the southern Cameroons alone could increase if we're combining the country's entire power generation capacity by nearly 65% if fully exploited. So more importantly, the territory itself, that's the southern Cameroon itself, sits directly beside Nigeria, a country of more than 220 million people that frequently struggles to maintain even 4,500 megawatts of operational electricity output nationwide. So the proximity of these rivers and hydro sites to Nigerian states such as Benue, Taraba, and Cross River creates enormous export opportunities. In other words, the southern Cameroon is not simply sitting on oil and plantations. Southern Cameroon is not simply sitting on oil and plantations. It is sitting on one of the most strategic underdeveloped hydroelectric reserves in the entire sub-region. This is important to note. Because when we talk about South Cameroon, so they want to go with our oil. They want this, they want that. We even say goodbye oil. We don't care about that oil. We have a lot more to depend on. Today I'm just looking at electricity. Now let's look at the great contradiction. And this great contradiction is about the fact that there is darkness in a land of power. So now here is where the contradiction becomes impossible to ignore. Because despite possessing one of the richest undeveloped hydroelectric reserves in Central and West Africa, the southern Cameroons today produces almost no major grid-level electricity locally. Zero. We produce zero. But before joining La République du Cameroun, we had electricity. We were producing electricity in Yoke, and we had Power Camp. We had the Yoke power plant and others. But they were simply shut down for no explainable reasons. The only purpose of doing that was to make sure that we will be entirely dependent on La République du Cameroun, as it is the case now. They did that in all sectors. So instead, the northern and southern zones depend overwhelmingly on electricity transmitted over extremely long and fragile lines stretching from the Sanaga River Basin deep inside La République du Cameroun. So in practical terms, this means the southern Cameroons sits at the extreme tail of Cameroon's national electricity grid. And history has repeatedly shown that regions at the tail end of weak transmission systems are usually the first to suffer. That's why we are suffering most from the power outages. That is the reason. The consequences are exactly what the population is experiencing today. Yeah, the consequences are exactly what the population is experiencing today. Endless voltage drops. Destructive power surges. Yeah, once in a while, power just comes, whoo, you find all your appliances are blown off. Fridge blown off, TV blown off, electric irons blown off, everything blown off. Week-long blackouts, collapsing infrastructure, and the complete absence of energy security. While the territory possesses the natural capacity to generate over 1,000 megawatts of electricity locally, entire communities continue to live in darkness. The human consequences of this contradiction are devastating. In Bamenda today, neighborhoods such as Upstation, Mendankwe, and behind Avenue have reportedly remained without stable electricity for weeks. In parts of Fako and Meme counties, prolonged outages lasting months have become normalized. Small businesses survive permanently on generators. dramatically increasing operational costs. Hospitals operate under emergency conditions, struggling to preserve medication, keep equipment running, and provide uninterrupted care. Students are forced to study with candles, lamps, and phone flashlights in an era where electricity powers education, communication, and economic opportunity. In this era, it is electricity that powers education, communication, and economic opportunity. So when you don't have it, what do you have? Yet at the same time, the rivers of Mencho, Manu, and Mount Fako continue flowing with enough force to potentially electrify not only the southern Cameroons, but also significant portions of neighboring Nigeria. This is why many people increasingly reject the idea that the electricity crisis or the energy crisis is merely technical or accidental. To them, the contrast between massive natural potential and chronic underdevelopment has become too stark to ignore. This is why public frustration has repeatedly spilled into the streets over the years. In Mutengene, residents have protested against prolonged outages and unbearable living conditions. In my 16 Boya, demonstrations erupted over the collapse of the electricity supply, which lasted over 4 months. In Tiko and Bole Bakundu, citizens openly challenged what they completely challenged what they perceived as a structural neglect and abandonment. So these protests are not simply about inconvenience or temporary service interruption. They reflect a deeper political and psychological frustration. Increasingly, many Southern Cameroonians compare their condition to that of a resource-rich territory trapped within a centralized system that extracts value while returning little meaningful development. For supporters of self-determination, the contradiction strengthens the argument that political dependence has translated into economic dependency and infrastructural vulnerability. They argue that a territory capable of generating massive hydroelectric power independently, exporting electricity to Nigeria, industrializing agriculture, and sustaining its own regional grid should not remain permanently dependent on distant political decisions made hundreds of kilometers away in Yaoundé. In that sense, the energy crisis has evolved beyond electricity itself. It has become for many a symbol of the broader struggle over autonomy, dignity, and the control over local resources and destiny. So is energy darkness being used as a tool of control? Is La République du Cameroun using this, as they're using every other thing, as a tool of control over the people of the southern Cameroons? Of course, this is why I say now we arrive at perhaps the most politically sensitive part of this entire discussion today. Because increasingly, many people in the southern Cameroons believe that the persistent energy crisis affecting the territory is not simply the product of incompetence or technical limitations, but part of a broader system of political and economic control. So critics often argue that electricity shortages are being experienced across La République du Cameroun too, across Cameroon as a whole, and are therefore not unique to the northern and the southern zones of the southern Cameroons. But many southern Cameroonians reject that argument outright. Their position is not merely that blackouts exist. Their position is that the southern Cameroons should never have found itself trapped within a political structure where chronic power governance, where chronic poor governance, centralized economic control, and systemic underdevelopment have become normalized realities in the first place. To the people of the southern Cameroons, the issue is larger than electricity itself. It is about the consequences of being tied to a governance system they believe has consistently failed to respect the territory's political history, economic potential, and the developmental priorities. This is why comparisons increasingly strengthen the argument for complete self-determination rather than accommodation within the present structure. Southern Cameroonians point to a painful contradiction, a very painful one. A territory capable of generating over 1,000 megawatts of hydroelectric power remains dependent on weak transmission lines extending from the Sanaga Basin hundreds of kilometers away. A territory rich in oil, fertile agricultural land, rivers, waterfalls, and strategic trade access to Nigeria remains economically fragile and under-industrialized. In the third millennium, while enormous hydroelectric projects such as PEM, Manfe, and Mencho remain frozen decade after decade, other regions continue benefiting from major centralized investments. We see La République du Cameroon has carried out major hydroelectric power dam projects in the southern grid of the country. You have Lompanga, you have Menvele, you have Mekin, now you have Naktigal. In short, you have some Lulu, you have all of those. There is nothing going on in the southern Cameroons. Nothing. All we hear about is once in a while when there's so much noise, they say feasibility studies. And everything ends at the level of feasibility studies. So for many people, this is not seen as accidental underdevelopment. It is interpreted as the predictable outcome of a system in which economic and political power are concentrated far from the territory that generates the resources. So in their view, dependence itself becomes a mechanism of control. When energy generation, taxation, resource management, and major infrastructure decisions remain centralized elsewhere, local communities inevitably remain vulnerable to neglect, delays, and political manipulation. You find that today, even the local councils in the southern Cameroons will no longer be able to collect even just the excise duty taxes they used to collect. So it is Yaoundé that will soon begin collecting what the council used to collect as revenue in Batibo, in my local government area in Batibo. They'll be doing same in Do. They'll be doing same in Mundemba. They'll be doing so in Guti. They'll be doing so in Tombe. Yaoundé is Yaoundé that will be collecting directly, not through the councils anymore. They will send their agents to come to the ground with all the costs that entails. And will tell you that you are under serious colonial trappings. And you wonder where we are coming from with such discourse. This is what it is. So it is this reality that increasingly pushes many southern Cameroonians beyond federalist arguments towards the demand for absolute independence. They argue that if the southern Cameroons controlled its own hydroelectric resources, negotiated its own power export agreements with Nigeria, and retained revenues generated from its rivers and natural wealth, the economic transformation would be dramatic. Instead of existing as the negated tail end of another country's fragile grid system, the territory could emerge as a major regional energy hub, supplying both domestic industries and neighboring markets. Instead of enduring endless blackouts, local industries in Bamenda, Boya, Limbe, Kumba, Wum, and Manfe could operate on a stable supply of locally generated electricity. So instead of exporting raw agricultural products while importing poverty and underdevelopment from La République du Cameroun, the territory could industrialize its cocoa, palm oil, tea, and coffee sectors through a reliable power supply and the local manufacturing system. So for many southern Cameroonians today, this is the deeper issue. They increasingly see the energy crisis not as an isolated technical problem, but as a visible symbol of what happens when a people rich in resources remain tied to a political system they believe was never designed to prioritize their development, their dignity, or long-term future. I was talking about transformation. Look at cocoa farmers in the southern zone, in Meme, in Manu, and others are cutting down their cocoa plants. Why? Because they are forbidden from selling even just the raw material, even just the cocoa bean itself, for far higher prices to Nigerian merchants. They are forbidden from doing that. They must sell it only to, La République du Cameroon controlled outlets at half the price they are being offered by Nigerian merchants. This is unacceptable. This is very undignifying, and this is unimaginable in the third millennium. Let's look at the Nigerian factor. Perhaps the most important and transformative dimension of the entire story is Nigeria. The southern Cameroons shares an approximately 1,700-kilometer border with Nigeria, placing it directly beside the largest population center in Africa and one of the most energy-starved markets in the world. Nigeria, despite its enormous oil wealth and economic size, frequently struggles to generate and distribute even 4,500 megawatts of operational electricity for a population exceeding 220 million people. So to fully understand the scale of that crisis, consider that some individual cities in developed countries consume more stable electricity than Nigeria can often provide nationwide. This means the demand for reliable power across the Nigerian border is enormous and constantly growing. And geographically, the southern Cameroons is perfectly positioned to meet part of that demand. The territory's major hydroelectric projects are not located deep inland away from potential markets. They are strategically positioned along river systems and border corridors naturally connected to eastern Nigeria. The hydroelectric project in Menchum County is located along the Katsina-Ala River system, a major tributary that flows directly into Nigeria's Benue Basin. That means electricity generated in the northern zone could naturally integrate into Nigerian energy networks serving states such as Benue and Taraba. At the same time, the Manfe hydroelectric project in Manyo County could directly supply electricity to Cross River State and the Calabar Industrial Corridor. In political terms, or rather in practical terms, the southern Cameroons is sitting at the doorstep of one of the largest unmet electricity markets on the African continent. This completely changes the economic equation. Instead of functioning as a neglected peripheral territory dependent on unstable electricity imports from Yaoundé-controlled grids, the southern Cameroons could emerge as a major regional power exporter, generating stable foreign revenue through long-term electricity supply agreements with Nigeria. And this is precisely why many southern Cameroonians increasingly see absolute independence not merely as a political aspiration, but as an economic necessity. Under an independent framework, the northern zone and the southern zones could negotiate direct cross-border energy partnerships, retain hydroelectric revenues locally, industrialize agriculture, stabilize local manufacturing, and build modern infrastructure around energy-driven growth. So instead of exporting raw cocoa, palm products, coffee, and crude resources while importing underdevelopment and darkness, the territory could become a strategic West African industrial and energy corridor. For many supporters of self-determination, this comparison is becoming impossible to ignore. A land rich enough to power parts of Nigeria should not itself remain trapped in chronic blackouts, infrastructural decay, and dependency. So increasingly, pro-independencies argue that the real barrier to unlocking this enormous economic future is no longer the lack of resources, but the political structure that ties the southern Cameroons to a system they believe systematically prevents the territory from fully controlling and developing its own wealth. Some will ask me, what do you really think independence will change in all this? Let me come now to exactly what independence will change. This is why many within the Southern Cameroons liberation movement increasingly frame the energy question not merely as an infrastructure issue, but as a sovereignty issue. Their argument is simple and direct. A people cannot truly develop while lacking control over their own strategic resources. In their view, the energy crisis affecting the Southern Cameroons is not only about blackouts and the failed transmission lines, It is about who controls economic planning, who controls investment priorities, and who ultimately decides whether local resources are developed for local benefit. Under an independent Southern Cameroons, advocates argue the territory will possess the legal and political authority to directly develop, manage, finance, and negotiate its own hydroelectric future. That will mean local control over hydroelectric revenues, direct cross-border electricity agreements with Nigeria, reduced dependence on centralized authorities in Yaoundé, and the ability to prioritize infrastructure projects based on local economic realities rather than distant political calculations. People sit in Yaoundé and decide that my people in Ashong at this point need public latrines. Whereas that's not what we need. Whereas what we need most importantly perhaps could even be farm to market roads to let the people tap the economic potential of our soils. So the economic implications of such a transformation would be enormous. Reliable electricity alone could fundamentally reshape cities such as Bamenda, Boya, Limbe, Kumba, Manthe, Wum, and Tiko. Instead of operating as consumption centers permanently dependent on imported goods and the unstable energy supply, these cities could become industrial growth corridors. Agriculture processing industries would emerge around cocoa, coffee, palm oil, tea, bananas, cassava, and timber production. Rather than exporting raw agricultural products while importing finished goods at higher prices, the territory could begin refining, packaging, and manufacturing locally. Factories would operate consistently without relying on expensive generators. Cold storage facilities would preserve agricultural produce. Small and medium-sized enterprises would flourish under stable energy conditions. What many people in the Southern Cameroons increasingly compare today is the painful difference between what exists and what could exist if the territory fully controlled its own economic direction. So the educational and technological impact would also be profound. A stable electricity supply would allow universities in Bamenda and Boya to expand engineering, hydroelectric, industrial, and technological specialization programs tied directly to the territory's economic needs. Technical institutions could produce skilled workers for power generation, transmission, infrastructure, and industrial manufacturing. Roads and energy transmission networks would naturally expand into rural communities surrounding major hydroelectric sites, creating secondary economic growth zones across the northern zone and the southern zone. So in practical terms, the Southern Cameroons could evolve from an underserved periphery into a self-sustaining industrial and energy corridor strategically positioned between Central Africa and Nigeria's massive market. For many supporters of self-determination, this comparison increasingly strengthens the argument that the current political arrangement has locked the territory into dependency, while independence could unlock a future built around local production, regional trade, and energy-driven development. This is why the debate has moved far beyond electricity itself. Increasingly, many Southern Cameroonians compare their current condition to resource-rich territories elsewhere in the world that remained underdeveloped because political control over their resources rested elsewhere. They argue that a territory possessing major hydroelectric reserves, offshore oil, fertile agricultural land, deep commercial access to Nigeria, and a highly educated population should not continue to exist in darkness, unemployment, infrastructural decay, and economic uncertainty, with our beautiful or best brains being drained into the West. To them, the comparison is becoming impossible to ignore. The same rivers capable of supplying electricity across borders cannot even reliably power the communities living beside them. And that contradiction increasingly fuels the belief that only absolute independence can allow the Southern Cameroons to fully harness its enormous natural and economic potential for the benefit of its people, rather than remain trapped within what many view as a structurally unequal political arrangement where we are simply full of exploitation. So what am I saying in the final analysis? So what is the deeper meaning of this crisis? Increasingly, many Southern Cameroonians argue that the issue is no longer simply about electricity. It is about power in every sense of the word power. Political power, economic power, control over natural resources, control over development priorities, and ultimately control over destiny itself. The Southern Cameroons today finds itself trapped in what many people describe as a painful and almost unbelievable paradox. A territory blessed with enormous hydroelectric potential, fertile agricultural land, offshore reserves, and strategic commercial access to Nigeria, and a highly educated population, as I said a while ago, yet still struggling with chronic blackouts, infrastructural decay, unemployment, economic underdevelopment, and torture of all nature. To many ordinary citizens, this contradiction has become impossible to explain away as mere backlog or temporary technical failure. Increasingly, they see it as evidence of a deeper structural problem tied directly to political control and centralized governance. And worse, the people of the Republic of Cameroon, I mean La République du Cameroun, do not even have the willpower to stand up for the change they need in their own country that directly affects the Southern Cameroons. And this is where the symbolism of darkness becomes powerful. For many people across the northern and southern zones of the Southern Cameroons, the repeated electricity outages are no longer viewed solely as infrastructural failures. They have become they have become symbolic of neglect, dependency, and exclusion. These have become symbolic of neglect, dependency, and exclusion. A land rich enough to potentially export electricity across borders remains unable to consistently power its own hospitals, its own schools, its own businesses and households. A territory capable of generating over 1,000 megawatts of hydroelectric energy continues to depend on unstable transmission lines stretching hundreds of kilometers from distant power centers controlled elsewhere. To many Southern Cameroonians, this mirrors the broader political relationship itself. Resources flowing outward, while underdevelopment, dependency, and fragility remain within the territory. Resources go, wahala remains. Increasingly, people compare this condition to that of resource-rich lands trapped in all kinds of unimaginable pain. So this is why the argument for absolute independence continues gaining emotional and political force among many segments of the population. Supporters of self-determination increasingly argue that no people can fully develop while remaining permanently dependent on distant authorities for control over energy, taxation, infrastructure, and economic investment. In their view, the Southern Cameroons possesses all the foundational ingredients necessary for sustainable development: hydroelectric potential, oil reserves, agriculture, access to regional markets, human capital, and geographical positioning. What they believe is missing is sovereign control over decision making. And that's the truth. The only ingredient missing for us to fully develop as a country is sovereign control over decision making. So they argue that an independent Southern Cameroons will possess the freedom to directly negotiate energy exports with Nigeria, reinvest hydroelectric revenues locally, industrialize agricultural production, modernize infrastructure, and prioritize development according to local realities rather than centralized political interest. For them, independence is increasingly framed not merely as an emotional or historical aspiration, but as an economic survival strategy aimed at unlocking the territory's suppressed potential. And perhaps that is the deepest comparison driving this movement today, the pro-independence movement. Many Southern Cameroonians increasingly compare what exists to what could exist. They compare weeks-long blackouts in Bamenda to the roaring rivers that can electrify entire regions. They compare unemployed youths wandering in darkness to the thousands of engineering, industrial, and technical jobs that hydroelectric development could create. They compare deteriorating towns and villages to the possibility of a thriving regional energy corridor linking the southern Cameroon to Nigeria and the wider West African economy. In the minds of many people, the issue is no longer whether the territory possesses enough resources to succeed. The issue is whether the current political structure was ever truly designed to allow the southern Cameroons to fully benefit from its own wealth. We're not asking anything from the wealth of La République du Cameroon. Or whether only absolute independence can finally transform the territory from a land of untapped promise into a land of realized possibilities. So, to crown it all, I would say the rivers continue to flow through the valleys of the northern zone and the forests of the southern zone. The waterfalls continue to roar with enormous force year after year. Beneath the soil and waters of the southern Cameroons lies enough electric potential to power industries, transform cities, electrify rural communities, and supply energy far beyond its borders. Yet, the people themselves continue to sit in darkness. Families spend weeks without electricity. Businesses collapse under generator costs. Students study by candlelight, while massive rivers capable of generating hundreds of megawatts flow only a few miles away. And this is why, for many southern Cameroonians, the energy crisis has become far more than a technical failure. Increasingly, it has become a symbol of broader political condition, of a very broad political condition. A territory rich in resources remains underdeveloped because meaningful control over those resources rests elsewhere, rests in the hands of the Bulu Beti Ekan. And so the question becomes unavoidable. Can a people truly prosper while disconnected from authority over their own economic future? I like to get answers in the comment section. Can the people truly prosper while disconnected from authority over their own economic future? Can genuine development emerge when decisions about energy, infrastructure, taxation, and investments are centralized far away from the communities expected to bear the consequences? Increasingly, many southern Cameroonians believe the answer is no. They now compare their condition not to what they once were promised, but to what they could realistically become if they fully controlled their hydroelectric resources, oil wealth, agriculture, and the strategic access to Nigeria's enormous market. History shows something very clearly. Once people begin connecting economic hardship to political structure, the conversation changes permanently. You want to hear that again? I say history shows something very clearly. That once people begin connecting economic hardship to political structure, the conversation changes permanently. What may begin as frustration over electricity shortages can gradually evolve into a much larger struggle over dignity, autonomy, self-governance, and freedom itself. And that is precisely why the question of energy in the southern Cameroons is increasingly becoming inseparable from the growing call for absolute independence. Stay with us on the JNA Connections, because this conversation is not ending here. We are only getting started, and we will go sector by sector to make you mirror exactly what the southern Cameroons will look like the day we finally kick La République du Cameroun and its colonial presence and their masters, Paris, that's France, out of our territory. So I want to thank all of you who are on this platform for the first time. Just to remind you, go right ahead and hit on that subscribe button and personalize, so that anytime anything new falls on this platform, on the JNA Connections, you will be the first to know. And always remember, whenever the news breaks, we meet here to make greater meaning out of it. And please do not forget to share the link to this communication as widely as possible. That is what we do on this platform, to reach as many people as possible. And of course, do not forget to hit the like button. It really goes a long way all the time. But make sure also to drop a comment. And please avoid insults in your comment. Be constructive. Let's stay on the issues, but be part of the conversation. So I want to thank all of you for your time, and To God be the glory.
My Lord, Ambazonia, blood bag, and leave him. Blood bag. Put your hands together and welcome to another place. Block by block, rooftop by rooftop, my fellow Ambazonians, sons and daughters of the Ambazonian Revolution. It is not time to celebrate. This is war. It is not time to celebrate. They robbed you of your homeland. They took away your hope. They robbed you of the right to dream of a future in the country of your birth. They murdered your citizens. They transform your brain to think like a Cameroonian, to worship their flag, to sing their anthem, to pray, hope, and dream like a Cameroonian. They took away the land of your birth. They demonized you. They robbed you of hope, of a dream of a future that is better than the one you inherited. They killed your parents, turned your fathers into boys, raped your mom, made your sisters to be ashamed, robbed them in more. They sent you into exile. You lost your neighborhood. They dispersed your friends. You became delinquent in a land that you did not understand. They took away something so essential to your own existence that you live here with your body, but your spirit hovers without knowing where to land. They took away from us something so important that life became something we have rejected in this land. They took away from you a country that gave you hope, built the first democratic system where there was an electoral government change. They took away from you your economic system. They blockade your social system. They crumbled your economy so you could go into their own system to work for them. They made you drive through their own system so you could pay toll gate into their own system. They robbed you of your right to think, to hope, to have a future in the country of your birth. 243 years ago, the Americans told the British that their time of independence was now. They fought for 8 years, 4 months, and 15 days. They lost the Battle of Boston, but they won the war for the freedom of the United States. The South Africans face a nuclear power. They face a nuclear power country. Mandela said he is going to die for his people. He struggled in jail for 27 years because he didn't want to bequeath to the next generation something worse than he had inherited. He fought like a valiant soldier. The Eritreans humbled the Ethiopians, a more powerful Ethiopia supported by Libya and Russia. They fought in trenches, in gutter holes, on rooftop to be able to bequeath to the next generation something better. Your freedom is in your hands. It is going to be fought inch by inch, block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood, rooftop by rooftop.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There you go.
Your freedom is in your hands. It is not going to be given to you on a platter of gold. I can assure you here from Washington, the land of our birth, the towns of Ambazonia will be liberated by the valiant soldiers who on a daily basis lay their lives, give their blood, deprive themselves of something more precious to make sure they can stand for our girls, for our children, for our mothers, for our fathers, to bequeath to the next generation a better country that they inherited. If this is the last thing you must give for your country, stand here in Washington and think of the freedom you enjoy. Think of the millions of Ambazonians who have not gone to school, those in jail. Think of Seseko, think of Deacon Tasang, think of Poundful, think of Mancho BBC, think of Mami Abi. Are you ready to lay your life for Ambazonia? I can assure you, Ambazonians, we will build the most beautiful place on earth, a place that you would take pride in calling yourself a citizen, that will give to you a social system, an economic system, a political system you can be proud of. That is why we fight. We are ready to die for it, go to jail for it, so all of us as a people will be free someday. God bless you all. God bless Ambazonia. From all your chores. You are here today because you are the true inhabitants of that place that was taken away from us. Yes. You have come here as soldiers of the revolution, the last people standing to defend our values, our customs, and our tradition. You've come here to send a message to those who have occupied our homeland, have raped our girls and turned our fathers into boys, that before they will occupy our land in the next 2 years, they will have to eliminate every Ambazonian from the planet Earth. 45 years ago, they instituted a concept of national unity. That concept coexisted with the destruction of our economic potentials. When we protested, they called us terrorists. They said they were standing for national unity. That national unity meant the destruction of our own potentials. It meant the elimination of our own leaders, our own patriot volunteers. The concept of nationality, of national unity, meant we did not have a university, that we should go to Yaoundé and study in French in the name of national unity. It meant we could not have our own parliament, because they thought asking us to sit in Yaoundé was the concept of national unity. They thought we didn't have a right to marketing board, because we should depend on them because of the concept of national unity. They thought they would destroy our police forces and we should depend on their own protection on the concept of national unity. 45 years ago, they lied us. 45 years after, we have vowed as a people who've suffered tribulation, economic deprivation, political exclusion, pain, anguish, hopelessness scattered and dotted in the capitals of Western places, being unsure what tomorrow holds for us, being unsure what our children will become, because we went to schools that was dedicated to the production of people who had no value. The best schools which were just 4 walls to turn us into dependent, to turn us into hopeless people. The best schools that were prison walls where they could revise our history, educate us in their own history to make us slaves. They turn us slaves in the land of our birth. Until a young man called BBC Mancho took his coffin on the street and told Cameroon, give us freedom or give us death. We are here today with our own coffin to bury the concept of national unity, as our brother has said, 1,000 feet down the earth.
Yes!
Never again, Ambazonians. Never again, Ambazonians. Never shall we allow a people whom we thought were our brothers to steal our own pride, to steal our happiness, to treat us like a captured people, to build prisons where they could kidnap our young boys and young girls, transport them from our own city into their own capital. Never again shall we coexist with a people who have no respect for our own essentiality. Never again shall we live with a neighbor that exploits our resources to develop its own country. Never again shall we live with a state that considers us a liability, refuses to develop our own capabilities to become assets to ourselves and our homeland. Never again shall we tolerate a system that denies us the right to exist. Never again shall we let our children be tortured on the streets of our country. Never again, my people, shall we live in pain, shall we live in anguish, hopelessness. Never again shall we sit back and watch our women raped in hostels. Men of Ambazonia, I want you to take the battle block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood. If not for yourself, for our women, for our children, for all those mothers who cannot go to the market because we've imposed ghost towns, for those children who cannot go to school because they've given us an educational system that is a liability, for the lawyers who cannot go to court because they cannot speak the English language in our court, for all of you sitting in asylum homes in dotted places, hopeless, not knowing what your future would be, whether you will end up in an old people's home or you will return to a land that is hopeless. You are here as soldiers of the revolution. Fight for your country. Never let anybody tell you it's impossible. I have come here as the commander of this revolution to let you know that we will defeat Cameroon. Yes. Yes. We will not only defeat Cameroon, yes, we will make it impossible for Cameroon again to ever invade our land. Yes. I have come here to assure you, to give you the assurances. A few months down the line, we will be able to make our country ungovernable for the Ekemas, the Muketes, the Atanganjis, yes, all those who keep collaborating with the system, yes, the Musonges, yes, the Achidi Achus, yes, all the parliamentarians who legitimize occupation in Yaoundé. Yes. If they cross the Mongo and the Matasin, that will be a one-way ticket to hell. Yes. We will make it impossible for them to ever return in our homeland. Yes. To legitimize a system that has brought us pain, unhappiness, anguish, uncertainty. It is the land of our birth. It belongs to you. For those people yet unborn, for those children who are not going to school, it is your right to exist. And you are here to let Cameroon.
My name is Asa Patrick Ndango. I'm speaking on behalf of 12 of us who were kidnapped by armed gangs and thugs of the Paul Biya regime and the government of La République du Cameroun. Since our abduction some 6 months ago, we have been held hostage at various hidden cells in conditions only comparable to concentration death camps with the singular purpose to kill us. At the moment, we are held in a bunker at the said Gendarmerie headquarters in Yaoundé. If dying is the price that we must pay to guarantee our freedom and to re-establish the independence of our country, then it is a price worth paying. Whatever you do and whatever you think.
Hail this land of glory, we the Ambazonia, special loyalty. Praise the soul of Savior who granted us the freedom. Our legends to the hero who fought the lonely diablo. Glory to glory, we rise and never to fall. Here in a nation, flowing with earth and holy. Glory, glory, glory to the Father for making you a nation, a joy forevermore. Ambazonia, land of freedom, you shall live in plenty, meet in our need, and your children shall be like the stars above. The Most High God being the watchman of this nation. Ambazonia, land of freedom, you shall live in plenty, meet in our need, and your children shall be like the stars above. The Most High God being the watchman of this nation.